if I'm in New York City right now listening to a radio station called Why Aren't You Jewish, or somewhere else, Why Aren't You Muslim, I feel like all those would be the same reason, mainly because I didn't grow up with that faith.
I like the honesty and the candor of that, and I think this is something that is worth kind of meditating on. And it doesn't mean it's wrong, right? Like, being born into a religion, being born into a way of thinking, that doesn't automatically mean it's wrong, but it doesn't automatically mean it's right either. There's an important part of growing up where you say, is what I was taught true? Is what I received from my parents true? And I'm glad that you are seemingly open to that question or asking that question. And so if I were to make the pitch for the Catholic Church, it wouldn't just be, as you heard maybe at the top of the hour, both Cy and I grew up Catholic. Now, I didn't grow up really understanding what the Catholic Church believed. So I was totally ready, even by the age of about 12, to jump ship until I really learned a lot more about why Catholics believe what they believe. So I feel you on that. I think, I grew up this way isn't really enough of an explanation or enough of an answer, but it's really an honest answer at the same time. To that, I would suggest this, because you mentioned all these non-Christian alternatives as well, that the way I kind of describe it is other world religions are about men reaching out to God. Judaism is an exception from this, but as a general rule, other world religions and other philosophies, Buddhism and the like, are about this quest to find God. There is a natural desire to see God and to know God. And what makes Judaism and Christianity unique, what makes it different, is that it's God's reaching out to man. It's God revealing himself to man rather than, some brilliant thinker or sage saying, here's what I think about God, about the universe, about the world. Does that distinction make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so that's just like Christianity versus non-Christianity. But within the kind of, at least Catholic Protestant discussion, there's a similar sort of thing. That Protestantism is man reaching out to Christ. It's man trying to follow Christ to the best of his own ability, certainly aided by grace. I don't think any Protestant would deny that. But there's still this attempt on the end of man to just say, what do I think Christ taught? And there's a sense that I have to make my own church, my own denomination, or have to follow another man-made denomination. And the Catholic answer to that is no, Christ comes to us. He makes the church. We don't make it for him. Just as God reveals himself to us, we don't reveal God to ourselves. Just as there's that difference between non-Christian religions, man reaching out to God, you have a similar thing at the level of the church, with Protestants kind of having a man-made denomination that's just as apart as having a man-made religion is, where there may be some true things there, but the way God does it is he does the revealing, he does the building, he builds the church. And I think you can see this even, you mentioned being Methodist. You can trace this even in the history of Methodist thought. So John Wesley, who I really have a great deal of respect for, he has a 1749 letter to a Roman Catholic in which he talks about all the things that he and Catholics have in common. He came from an Anglican background, and one of the things he talks about is that Methodists and Catholics both believe that Christ was born of the Blessed Virgin Mary, who, in his words, as well after as before she brought him forth, continued a pure and unspotted virgin. That is, John Wesley took it for granted that Catholics and Methodists could agree on the perpetual virginity of Mary. And I think it's safe to say that virtually no Methodist today agrees with that. That Methodists have strayed from even not just historic Christianity, even historic Methodism. And the check against that, the way we don't fall into that, is by saying, what has Christ revealed to us? And the way we know that is, what has he revealed through the church, rather than just as individual followers, what do I think the message is? Does that distinction make sense? And is that maybe a helpful way of thinking about the question?
Yeah, and one of the biggest things I struggle with, and it might be a separate topic from today, is just, in my view, if I don't believe the correct denomination of the correct faith, I'm lost. And to me, if I grew up in a certain family that never believed that, then I just messed up. I didn't mess up, but I'm out of luck, Unless I completely switch to the right one, maybe that's Catholic, maybe it's something else. But unless I switch to the right one, I'm just out of luck.
So,
you see how I'm.
Oh yeah,
with
no,
all
I
these
totally get where you're coming
all these
from.
Different things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So to that, I would say this: like, for one, how you raise your child really does matter. I don't want to act like it doesn't matter. So you can prepare a kid to have a proper view of God, a proper view of the world, a proper view of right and wrong conduct, or you can prepare a child to have a wrong view of all those things, and you can really mess them up for life. That's just one of the reasons parents are really important. But no one is a slave to their family of origin. There are all sorts of people who convert. Pew Research study found that a majority of Protestants convert at some point in their life within the kind of world of Christianity. That if you grow up Methodist, the odds of you dying Methodist are a little under 50%. So it's not just like, well, if you grew up in this one way, you have no other possibility of getting to another worldview because you have free will. You can still say, no, I hear another vision of reality that makes more sense. I see another Christian denomination that has a more coherent claim or whatever it is, right? Like people convert for all sorts of reasons. But then the third thing is, in terms of God's judgment, God judges you on what you say yes and no to, not on what you didn't know and had no way of knowing. So this is pretty clearly taught in Luke 12:48, in which Jesus says, everyone to whom much is given, of him much will be required. And of him to whom men commit much, they will demand the more. In other words, you're judged based on what you do with the gifts God gave you. And those gifts include your natural talents. They also include the upbringing you got. They include like your access to divine revelation. They include all of those things. And so the people who live in ignorance aren't judged on the things that they're in ignorance of. They're judged on how they responded to God's call on them in whatever way he did call them. So you see this really clearly in Acts 17. St. Paul goes to Mars Hill, and he's talking to a group of pagans who have a temple to an unknown God. And he tells them that he's there to proclaim that unknown God. And he tells them that, God is merciful to them from that time of ignorance when they were seeking after him and didn't know where to find him. But now he's come. Like, he's the fulfillment of that longing of the human heart. And so Paul is there to reveal this previously unknown God. So that's an important difference. Like, had they not heard Paul's message, they wouldn't have been judged for having not known about Christianity. They had no control over that. Once they hear about Christianity, this is the fulfillment of everything they've been longing for. And it also creates this responsibility. Now, what are you going to do about it? So the gospel is an invitation. It is a gift. And it's also a challenge. So in that sense, I wouldn't worry about people who had, through no fault of their own, didn't have access to the gospel, except to say, bring them the gospel.